Assalamu alaikum. This presentation is concerned with establishing an African-US strategic relations. Sudan will be taken as an applied model. Is it true that the future of the world relies on spreading the knowledge while maintaining moral values, ethics, principles, and human dignity as means for achieving global peace? Is it true that adopting a strategic approach in Africa betters the chances of Africa and the United States playing a more central and effective role in the world economy? What are the missed dimensions of the relations between Africa and the North? Can we achieve a rational human model in the African theater? Is it possible to establish a Sudanese-American corridor for interests, a corridor that cares for peace, human security, global and future security? Is it possible to establish a strategic relationship between Sudan and the United States of America based on soft power? Can Sudan play a major role as a main pillar of a strategic relation between the African continent and the United States? Is it possible to make Sudan a foundation for human, regional, and global peace? I will answer these questions throughout this presentation. Africa, with its vast natural resources, is still the most underdeveloped continent in the world. Poverty, malnutrition, lack of education, high levels of illiteracy, and the highest rates of civil conflicts. After colonialism, the continent witnessed a new mechanism for siphoning African resources. The means of access have changed, but its principles and bases have changed very little. Rise in extremism, human trafficking, migration to the West, drugs, and etc. That means we need to think different when we plan for human, regional, global, and future security. We need to consider that the pathway to peace and stability is the balanced global comprehensive development. An important question arises here. With the rising levels of African awareness and the emergence of a new generation of African patriots who advocate for better relationship between Africa and the world, can partnerships are to be based on mutual interest and justice? In light of such development, globalization, and the emergence of new generation of African youth, we view this as an opportunity for partnerships and strategic alliances. Yet, Africa continues to be a site of conflict due to the global competition over its natural resources and the emergence of new powers. New global powers are seeking to boost their economies and enhance their global standing by securing strategic energy and mineral sources in Africa. This fuels the urgent desire to establish partnerships based on a strategic vision when dealing with African countries. It is certain that the next 100 years will carry a different future for Africa. This is the subject we seek to address in this presentation. Partnerships that lead to human feasibility, social feasibility, economical feasibility, national security, regional security, global security, and future security. If we take the political situation of Africa, and if we look to the political situation, we will consider that the most of the different regimes are recognized throughout Africa to share a fragile political structure expressed in the following observations. 1. Political system which rely on external support, lack of good governance, weak democratic institutions and non-peaceful rotation of power, supremacy of individual, group and tribal regimes over the state, dominance of subnational affiliations, corruption and lack of official transparency, poor decision-making process. If the U.S. exercises the same approach within Africa, as it does its boundaries. A mature, well-established system of utopian values with a qualified provisional framework of principles related to human security is transition from a strategic perspective to one reinforced by moral values and respect for the will of the people, would establish a just and fair, sustainable practice. The recovery of the African economy, with its population of more than 1.2 billion, will have a positive impact on the global economy and the American economy in particular. If the field of scientific and technical production can enable the proper utilization of resources and preserve the environments needed to maintain rainfall and groundwater, Africa then can fill a large part of the global food gap in the coming decades by growing on its vast expanses of land. Conversely, a lack of development in this sector could be a direct threat to global food security. This is an important item for investment operations in Africa in the coming decades. Perhaps it will be the nexus of strengthening relationship between the global north and south. Herewith are a few examples of cooperation experiences with Africa with a view to the lessons that can be learned to establishing better relations in a new form. 1. The development of armed forces, establishing an independent U.S. military command for Africa. The attempt to establish the Great Horn of Africa, which facilitates the process of controlling wealthy areas, brandishing the use of force to resolve regional conflicts and preemptive war, supporting alliances and security efforts that support the United States, economic engagement, focus on specific regional areas as focal areas, the launch of the Growth and Opportunity Act as a competitor to the European Union Cotonou Convention with the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries, launching the Trade and Development Act for Africa 2000 and calling for coordination with African countries as partners rather than recipients of grants or aid, establishment of an exchange area with North African countries, the initiative to promote Africa's wealth on the world market with the aim of expanding trade between the United States and Africa, intelligence collaboration, the political and economical sanctions. After 100 years of the International War I, let us take samples of the lessons from Western experience in Africa. 1. The processes of changing the basis, means, and principles of cooperation with Africa reflects the interest of the external parties without taking into account the interest of the African party in a framework of acute competition. This could be the most important threat to the future of cooperation with Africa. 2. The contradiction between many Western policies and actions in Africa. The failure of the traditional aid policy. 4. The political transformations in Africa, which are caused by Western attempts to spread the principles of liberalism, resulting in well-established governments in a number of African countries that expresses dictatorship with some features of democracy. Paying attention to a generation of new leaders to reproduce the Arabic Spring, which was based on systems isolated from their popular basis. As a result, their neglect of political development led to their collapse. This exemplifies the general fragility of the Western model in this context. 6. The instability in Africa will not enable the realization of the interest for all African and foreign parties. 7. There is a need for conviction in the economic engagement with Africa based on mutual strategic interests achieved on a strategic basis. However, foreign groups have not yet developed this important link. 8. business establishing and supporting militias and organizations that work within the framework of their country's strategies threatens African sovereignty and state instability that compromises any future international cooperation with Africa. 9. Favoring military means and supporting armed movements rather than using intellectual strategies impedes the performance of many African countries, including Sudan. This forges a reality that contradicts many Western principles and values of democracy. The continuous support of armed movements not authorized by the people overshadows popular will. 10. The imposition of sanctions, as was the case with Sudan, negatively affected the Sudanese people and impacted children's health, education, and service along with the economy and the environment, thus threatening human security and the country as a whole. 11. Attempts to establish cooperation with Africa, such as the introduction of the Trade and Development Act 2000 to work with African countries as partners, not as beneficiaries of grants or aid. Launching of African Wealth Promotion Initiative on the world market for the purpose of expanding trade between the United States and Africa have not yet met Africa's strategic interests. The lack of concern for African finished goods. 12. Africa's huge population, its cooperation on value-added issues such as increasing national income and employment, a philosophy of national income distribution, an economic philosophy that achieves global cooperative advantage remain unstable in Africa. 13. Perhaps the main point in the Western experiment, in the Western philosophy related to cooperation with Africa, which did not accommodate in theory and in practice the relation between comprehensive development, psychological, cultural, social, political, economic, etc., and the achievement of human, national, and international security. Thus, an attempt to impose a different cultural reality will lead to continued underdevelopment, faiths, and instability. Now we come to China, which has maintained a relationship with Africa for more than half a century. At the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, China's relation with Africa grew rapidly. With the honest scientific assessment of the situation in Africa, the world moved toward the 21st century. However, Western strategies, policies, and practice on the African continent during the past centuries indicated a great failure. The richest continent in the world is the poorest and the most unstable with increasing security threats. Hundreds of African studies conducted in the past years on the future of African continent express a state of dissatisfaction that prevails in the Black continent, and that there is a need for a new African future. It seems that China has sought as much as possible to follow a concept based on political and economic grounds, also based on non-intervention in the affairs of others, strengthening mutual trust, political and cultural contacts, and equality and mutual benefit rather than the concept of exploitation embodied in most of the previous experiences in Africa. We take here the Chinese main objectives in Africa. One of the main features of the Chinese model is that it does not use hard power. Military use does not exist on its agenda, and it does not seek to support any African rebel movements. In its relation with Africa, China focuses on establishing mechanisms of understanding, planning, intensifying political communication, and deepening mutual political trust. China's relation with Africa played a major role in reaching its most important goals, breaking international isolation, gaining international recognition. African support for China in its battle for a permanent seat in the United Nations is an indicator of China and Africa's strong relationship. With the launch of the Reform and Opening Up policy in 1978, the security of strategic energy and mineral resources became a priority of China's foreign policy and an arrangement that ensured China's development. With the launch of the Reform and Opening Up policy in 1978, the security of strategic energy and mineral resources became a priority of China's foreign policy, an arrangement that ensured China's development. At the beginning of the 21st century, China's strategic objectives to secure strategic sources of energy, strategic minerals, and strategic stake in global markets emerged. However, at strategic depth, it shifted from securing China's development and became critical to its international ambitions. Securing energy resources, strategic minerals, and strategic markets is a key element in the management of international strategic conflict and, by extension, international strategic balance. At the Beijing Summit of China-Africa Forum in 2006, the two sides agreed to establish a new type of strategic partnership featuring equality and mutual trust. Politically, culturally, mutual benefits gave China-African relation a new boost, even rising to the level of strategic partnership. The following are China's main policies, methods, and mechanisms for strengthening ties with Africa. Number one, non-interference in the affairs of others, promotion of mutual trust as well as political and cultural communication, equality and mutual benefits, take into account the differences between China and African countries in terms of cultural, national, social, custom, traditions, and development level, encouraging competitive professional Chinese companies to expand investment in Africa. The main China policies in Africa are seeking to establish a viable environment and provide the services required for investment by conducting investment protection agreements and avoiding taxation and duplication with the countries concerned. Transfer of technology, contributing to sustainable development, increasing purchasing power, improving living standards, and achieving added value for Africa. Social responsibility, support African efforts to develop economic models and methods that suit national concerns, expand exemption of African goods from Chinese tariffs. The most important tools of China are: 1. The Belt and Road Initiative, which does not represent a road or passage for the transport of goods and trade, but rather a profound concept of international cooperation. It extends over a large number of countries and over a number of different political systems and connects it to each other. In accordance to this philosophy, the initiative will integrate interests, respect cultures, and promote international cooperation. The USA could greatly benefit from embracing the philosophy of international cooperation on which the global North-South partnership is based. A new African-US path paved with values, justice, and mutual interest, a path that cares for human security, global and future security. Continue the Chinese most important tools: popular diplomacy, educational grants, cultural communication, special assistance in infrastructure, providing assistance free of any political conditions to Africa, trade and investment, attention to improving local public facilities, attention to human resources development, voluntary action to help African states increase their own capacity for economic development and social progress, attention to issues of peace and security in Africa, participation in United Nations peacekeeping operations in Africa. The most important mechanisms are: 1. China-African Union Strategic Dialogue Mechanism. 2. Strategic Planning Mechanism for the Development of China-African Relations established in 2000. The Ministerial Conference. Chinese participation in the African Development Bank and the West African Development Bank. model centers for the dissemination of Chinese agricultural techniques in Africa. What are the outcomes of that? One, as a result of China's new approach to Africa, trade between both sides grew rapidly from about $1 billion in 1980 to about $115 billion in 2010 and $209 billion in 2019. And Chinese investment in Africa has increased to about $100 billion. It has become the largest trading partner with Africa. Two, in Sudan, China obtained a concession to extract oil after aiding Sudan in breaking the U.S. freeze on oil extraction. In 2004, it established infrastructure from oil pipelines to refineries, port development, and more. Once CNPC won the bid against its Western rivals, it offered a $2 billion grant to the government without being subject to the IMF blackmailing of Western companies, which enabled a strategic resource for China in Angola from falling into corporate hands. But the Chinese demand 70% of the road construction contracts funded by the loan go to Chinese companies. This means thousands of Chinese would pour into the country with an increasing unemployment rate. According to some studies, China's success in winning the operations was due to Western's lack of help towards Angola. The West did not build roads, new airports or railways, new government buildings like the Chinese did outside the IMF usual terms. Chinese arrangements did not meet the American military strategy in Africa with a Chinese military strategy. The great influence of the American and Western media on the African audience, in addition to the weakness of the Chinese cultural activity in Africa, may affect China's balance of achieving suitable control. China's effort to help Africa raising living standards and boost development capacity remain weak. Some agreements with China paved the way for the transfer of skilled and unskilled Chinese labor to Africa in large numbers, which hinders Africa's fight against poverty. China transferred a level of simple and medium technology under poor environmental interests. Now, with the reference to the mentioned experience, I will talk in this part about Sudan and the strategic relation with the United States. And we'll start with question, why focus to Sudan? I draw focus to Sudan in this presentation for two reasons. First, for the consideration of Sudan as an applied model for the African countries. The second reason, to clarify Sudan's role as a main pillar of the strategic relationship between the United States and Africa. Sudan has 5 major strategic advantages over the other African countries. They are: first, energy resources, a strategic quantity of oil, natural gas, high purity uranium, which could support the largest energy markets. Solar energy is emerging strongly in the light of the increasing global energy consumption. Second, fresh water. Sudan has a strategic underground water reserve and a strategic amount of rainwater besides its share of the River Nile, which qualifies Sudan to produce great part of the world's food. Third, the fertile agricultural land of more than 200 million acres. With consideration to the American strategies to share the current and anticipated food market and its quest to maintain a balance in key conflicts on the international food arena through arrangements that will increase its capabilities in food production abroad. Fourth, the position of the most important strategic metals. The geostrategic location, Sudan is qualified to be the main hub for the United States in Africa and across the African corridor based on its location, as it connects the Arab world and the African continent with 700 kilometers of its borders to the Red Sea. And it is important to consider the Sudan location in the heart of the so-called Metal Belt, as it is bordered by 4 landlocked countries that form a ring between South Africa and North Africa. Therefore, the establishment of strategic economic, political and cultural relations and connection with the Sudan along its border with the Red Sea would link these countries through geopolitics, railways, pipelines, roads, Red Sea ports, River Nile ports with Egypt and South Sudan, and will act as a main pillar for development and stability. It will also elevate organized crime, extremism and migration to Europe and USA while achieving strategic economic gains. I will take some points here before introducing the suggested strategic perspective of Africa-US relations, and will start with defects in partnership between the North and the South globally. Point number 1, the misuse of natural resources and the great destruction suffered by forests is a major contributor to the failure of the income distribution that affect most nations. Point number 2, exploitation of resources and the conflict of interest are viewed internationally as a threat to human security, leads to poverty and increased crime, immigration, drugs, etc. Point number 3, the measure of all this indicates that there is a defect in the partnership between the global North and South. Thus, achieving global security from a strategic perspective requires wisdom, new concepts in general, and new strategic partnership initiative with Africa in particular, which the United States of America could initiate at this time. Also, we should take into account the demands of global security, the proper utilization of development of resources, the preserving of the environment for future generations, the human security. Point number 4, when talking about the relations of strategic depth between Africa and the United States of America, we must refer to the issues that prevent real strategic partnership from taking place. Here are some examples. The use of paramilitary militias financed by business. A few examples of this. 1, the war in the northeast of Congo, the war in South Sudan, the conflict between Uganda and Rwanda for control over diamond mines. Most conflicts mainly fueled by interest in the wealth of mineral resources, oil, agriculture and water resources. An example, the Saharan conflict over iron and phosphate between Morocco and the Polisario Front. Another example comes in the form of changing regimes and systems of government, such as in the Congo and Biafra region in Nigeria. So, it is time to talk about humanizing the global order. We live through historic moments where the sense of global awareness becomes more motivational than ever before. The future of the world relies on spreading the scientific knowledge while maintaining moral values, ethics, principles and human dignity as means for achieving global peace. We believe in the House of Wisdom that there are those who are qualified to achieve this, and we look forward to leading an African-US strategic dialogue. In this context, we are seriously seeking to establish a strategic relationship between the Sudan and the United States of America based on soft power, not hard power. With Sudan history as a cradle of human civilization and as a center for the majority moderate Sufi Islam open to the world, with the consideration to the distinguished Islam of Sudan, the Sufi Islam, which is based on the building of a human character through effective psychological, moral, cultural and social traits to establish internal peace, purity, love, tolerance and compassion, by extension establishing peace for human region and the world. The Sudanese culture makes Sudan a microcosm of Africa, with its location being at its heart, overlooking the Red Sea and various natural resources. This qualifies Sudan to be a corridor of peace and interests. With all these resources and qualities in mind, we look forward to establishing a new partnership with the United States, allowing exchange of knowledge, technology, and sales expertise, a formula for mutual long-term success between Africa and the United States of America. In its quest to create a better future for the Sudan, the House of Wisdom put forth a national vision of political practice that respects of human dignity, security, and happiness based on knowledge, creativity, justice, and ethics. This is based on a deep philosophy that achieving human, national, regional, and global and future security depends on looking behind the gun, behind the crime, behind the limits. A philosophy based on driving comprehensive development, psychological, cultural, social, political, economical, scientific, and technological, not only national but at global level. The main focus is as follows. Sudan is suggested the center hub of strategic relation between Africa and the United States of America. Why? Sudan is considered a microcosm of Africa as it includes hundreds of tribes. The Sudanese cultural impact extends throughout the continent. Sudan is distinguished by its strategic geographical location linking Africa to the Arab world along the Red Sea, bordering 7 African countries. Sudan has numerous and vast resources which qualifies it to enter into a strategic cooperative relation with the United States. We, the experts in the House of Wisdom, based on detailed strategic studies, find Sudan to be essential in establishing a strategic partnership between Africa and the United States of America. This great partnership needs some essential arrangements for sustainable success. I will talk in brief about this. If we link the previous statements to our efforts at the House of Wisdom, which aims to achieve a national consensus for Sudan Vision 2040, it will serve as a reference for the state respected by both the governing and opposition parties. Besides our efforts to improve the political practice and establish democratic system based on human dignity, knowledge, and ethics, unifying Sudanese identity rather than the divisiveness mindset of tribalism, along with the framework for political action and the concept of citizenship as a base for the rights and duties. Bound by the wider base of the tolerant and compassionate Sufi Islamic sect, this and other cultural, social, and political arrangements show promise in producing a distinguished Sudanese model and guarantee stability and sustainability for the suggested partnership. These philosophies, along with the national consensus on a Sudanese vision, would establish a Sudan as the nexus of the strategic relation between Africa and the United States, as well as regional and global peace. Adopting a strategic approach in Africa betters the chances of the United States and Africa playing a more central and effective role in the economy. Associating with Africa on a strategic basis allows the United States access to Africa's huge strategic advantages and promotes their success in a number of key international competitive markets. This would also support Americans' desire to curb certain countries' control of the rare minerals that are used to develop advanced technologies. The following points reflect the dimensions and policies that would most likely govern the strategic relation between Africa, Sudan mainly, and the United States, whereby we can achieve a rational human model in the African theater. 1. Cooperation that established and strengthening the will of the people in accordance with the philosophy and vision put forward. The balance between U.S. strategic interests and African interests. 3. The principle of linking interests strategically to achieve and secure these interests, promote mutual trust and political and cultural communication, adopt a mutual benefit approach. 6. Support efforts to establish good governance and spread the concept, culture, and conduct of the state. 7. Support political developments and the adoption of procedures that respect the sovereignty and interests of the state while applying the principles of good governance. 8. Attention to infrastructure cooperation. 9. The adoption of the values, principles, and guiding principles of the American strategy in Africa based on respect for African cultures, adoption of non-interference principles in unrelated affairs, conservation in Africa, focusing on outcomes basis, not outputs, adoption of value-added policy for Africa, including the transfer of advanced technology. Support security and stability in Africa and not to pursue policies or practices contrary to that. Establishment of central systems to launch Sudanese American and African American cooperation. 14. Deepening U.S. presence in African markets through partnership and developing mutual benefits. Establishing final industries in Africa to achieve the added value of Africa, especially since the United States of America does not have pressure caused by population to send workers to Africa like China do. 16. The establishment of American industrial cities in Sudan, opening to the door for export to cross into markets and enjoy open borders. 17. The establishment of multimodal transport system within the framework of the African corridor. This includes, on a strategic basis, a trans-African railway, road and pipeline networks, ports on the Red Sea, and airports, logistics stations, and energy. 18. The launch of American industry from Africa, where resources are available under proper economic policies, modern technology and expertise, as well as the proposed economic philosophy that secure production of high quality and competitive costs. This will pave the way for a comfortable entry into the international market, the establishment of an internal base in Africa of popular satisfaction which underlies the sustainability of success. 19. Strategic arrangements to link interests around agricultural land and water in coordination with the Sudan with a view to targeting food strategy. 20. Establish a common economic philosophy that associates the United States with the grassroots that will form the most secure strategic arrangements to protect American interests in the coming decade by establishing an economic philosophy based on job creation for Africans, establishing production relationship between small producers and national global companies similar to the East Asian experience, establishing a philosophy based on the development of society including human resources development and capacity building, increasing purchasing power and improving living standards, establishing an economic philosophy that directly links investment with social responsibility. 21. Establishing an investment climate that includes internationally competitive policies that curb double taxation and unreasonable fees. Support African efforts to cultivate development methods suited to their national specifications. Building African information systems, including the production of mineral maps. 24. Support scientific research, especially on the development of Africa and the optimal utilization of resources. 25. Bring professional knowledge and training of human resources in various sectors to learn and improve the skills and culture of value-added chain in products. Conduct market research and surveys for the African markets. On this part, let us talk about the culture support and capacity building. Before becoming an important bridge for trade between the north, south, east, and west of the continent, Sudan is also a fertile region for cultural and civilization international among all the region of Africa due to its history, culture, and geography. Sufi groups throughout Sudan continue to play an important role in shaping the African conscience and spreading true and moderate Islam. Through the Sudanese Vision 2040, the House of Wisdom seeks to reposition the Sudan as a linked country in the important intersection as well as preserving its historical role in spreading love and peace. The House of Wisdom has set out the strategic frameworks, philosophies, and objectives that reflect the Sudanese vision and will determine the directions and areas of training in a way that serve the overall development of the Sudan. It should be pointed out that establishing a strategic relationship between Africa and the United States in general and between Sudan and the United States in particular need a wise political strategy to create the conditions required for that purpose. It is also necessary to realize the importance of a national strategic vision that reflects all citizens as an intellectual framework to ensure that this vision is not fundamentally affected by change in governments. It's important to define the ideas, goals, objectives, and the system of values that will reflect the state and serve as a reference for preparing its plans and policies. This idea is meant to crystallize, spread, and promote a cultural idea that establishes the concept of the state and the culture of good governance, including transparency, accountability, etc. This would also ensure that the state's behavior towards its citizens and the international family would not compromise the international security and the security of the environment and human security. In addition, the concept of Sudanese identity and the broad sense of belonging would rise as an alternative to tribalism. This cultural idea also requires respecting and understanding the cultural concept of life. Without it, a sense of life is lost, a dangerous feeling which is not wise to ignore. All parties should be without prejudice in human, national, regional, and international security, and instead be supported by philosophies of the moderate and Sufi Islam, which upholds love and respect for human beings, regardless to ethnicity, religion, or race. The House of Wisdom seeks to realize a Sudanese vision and Sudanese dream, doing so by reaching a national alliance for all peoples based on approval, national goals, and aspiration founded on humanity, justice, and knowledge. National alliance that transcends the past and considers the international and future security. Now that Sudan's December 2018 revolution has succeeded in removing the regime of al-Bashir, the common enemy for the revolutionists and the rebels have been removed. However, instead of holding a national dialogue on a common platform to see what they are aiming for the civilians, the government entered into a negotiation with the rebels and attempt to impose different visions that took place. In the end, both sides lack official public mandate in what appears as a clear attempt to monopolize the will of the Sudanese people. Parties lack electoral official public mandate during the transitional period, so any vision of major strategic issues they impose will be considered a kind of inflaming of the popular will, undermining the most important principles of democracy. Having foreign assistance in facilitating a dialogue between transitional government and the armed movements that do not have public mandate is a dialogue contrary to the principles of democracy. It established a rebellion against the will of the people and will prolong the state of instability. At this time, we just need to help the peaceful opposition and the armed forces to get into national dialogue through Sudanese platform to produce the Sudanese vision that reflects the aspirations they have worked for over the years. This includes the exercises of good governance and the respect for democracy. The national vision is to be provided by a wide popular and scientific means and to be passed by the elected parliament and protected by the Constitution. The American technical support operations should be in line with the mentality required to establish the proposed Sudanese-American partnership. At this pivotal stage in the history of the world, more than 7 decades after the end of the World War II and the establishment of the global order, the whole world aspires for a rational human order encompassed by morality. Overall, we look forward to the political cooperation of the United States in the execution of this African model. In this part, I will give some information about the economic philosophy since it is the main pillar for the partnership. The purpose of this philosophy is to achieve common interests and ensure the sustainability of development while taking the satisfaction of the people into account. It acts as a guide to obtaining and securing strategic shares in the world markets, also to achieve an international partnership between the Sudan and the United States, a partnership between national companies and direct basis of small producers. This philosophy is a main tool to create a new way of American and African thinking which will lead to a competitive advantage for the American products from Africa against those of Asia, China, South Korea, Japan, and etc. To make it clear, I will ask this question: can we produce the American Cadillac in Sudan, for example, with the American standard, but with the Chinese price? The answer is yes, possible, if we applied the suggested economic philosophy of the Comprehensive Sudan Vision 2040. This is very serious because it means presenting a very different approach and effective role for USA supported by the African Strategic Partnership. It is a philosophy driven by a vision of global competitive advantage similar to the Asian target system, thus establishing a state of security and stability by 1. Employment, development balance, justice, and non-discrimination among producers. 2. Implementing arrangements that guarantee the increase of national income of the African countries and distributes this income properly. These arrangements must respect the rights of small producers so that no partnership is established without a beneficial link between businessmen and popular bases. When not linked to the interests of grassroots, there is dysfunction. 4. Filling arrangements that will increase production, productivity, and competitive advantage of production. Arrangements, number 5, arrangements to ensure the proper exploitation of and development of natural resources are met. 5. The establishment of partnership between large companies and small producers in accordance with the state system that allows the initial inputs of a small producer during production. While acquiring modern technology, surveying world markets, the final process and assembly, and dealing with the complexities of the world trade is the main task of large African and American companies. 6. Reduce production costs through intensive production that enables A. Reduction of workers' wage per piece while raise his income with mass production. B. Reduction of government fees against higher production, imports, export, trade, and domestic services. Using the theory, 5% is better than 50%. For example, 50% multiplied by $1,000 is 500, while 5% multiplied by 100,000 is 5,000. Provide support for the joint education and training strategy to provide the required skills. 8. Establishing fair competition to raise quality and reduce cost by implementing the following conditions: non-discrimination, non-monopoly, the rule of law, financial freedom. 9. Providing a financial climate through the issuance of fiscal and monetary policies from global perspective to enable global competition. Applying the mentioned philosophy will lead to the same conditions that supported the competitive capabilities of the Asian tigers, which means a tremendous change and different beginning for the U.S. industry. Therefore, linking this to the African raw materials and even to the partnership around it, such as the extracted minerals, the sources of energy, transport close to Arab, African, and European markets, and even to the partnership around it, will bring American capabilities to the qualities and prices of Asian tigers rates, and will be a very important economic factor for the American and African presence on the international market. At that time, we can produce the American Cadillac with the Chinese price. What are the main opportunities for this partnership? Number one, take advantage of the global food gap by increasing agricultural production. Europe's agricultural processing is projected to decline between the years 2022 to 2030, leading to a global food gap. Through the monoculture policy and the continuous use of fertilizers since the last century, this weakens the fertility, natural sustainability and productivity of the European land. It can no longer sustain the annual production. Taking advantage of declaration of the European market for Sudanese agricultural imports to Europe, the need for the international markets of horticultural products, animal production, industry of animal production and leather industries, the production of fish by the required health and production standards, taking advantages of the Sudanese organic fruit products by producing organic juice, dried fruits, fresh fruit for the international markets. Oilseed production and oil industry, increase the production of gum arabic, which amounts to about 80% of the world production, the field of oil and energy, solar energy, industrial mining, medical treatment and pharmaceutical production. One of the best opportunities is the Sudanese-American corridor. The advantages of the Sudan geostrategic location at the heart of Africa, looking at the Red Sea and the presence to the COMESA group, Sudan has the opportunity to build a Sudanese-American corridor by investing in the multimodal transport industry. Investment in rehabilitation and development of infrastructure to global standards is part of it. The field of medical technology, clean energy technology, water management, mining technology, agricultural technology. In tourism, there are opportunities to develop Sudanese-American cooperation. There are a variety of tourist opportunities in addition to the climate diversity, allowing tourism throughout the year. This classifies Sudan as the 7th ranking tourist destination according to the World Tourism Organization in the United Nations. This includes existence of 237 pyramids out of total of 502, and the existence of treasures that refer to the Sudan as the oldest civilization in the world. Existence of royal tombs dating back 10,000 years. Confluence of the White Nile and Blue Nile forming the Nile River, which makes up 6 beaches alongside many historical events. The passage of the Prophet Moses in Sudan. The citadel of Brenz, believed to belong to Queen Belkis, Prophet Solomon. The holy mountain of Barkal, believed to have had the honor of hosting Prophet Moses where he learned wisdom. Desert, mountains, valleys and caves of the first man. Over 500 different types of birds, Sudan being an important crossing point for birds. 720 kilometers of the Red Sea beaches, ranked 3rd in the world base water purity. An opportunity to establish cities to reintroduce history and civilization, the museum cities. The most important mechanisms, means and requirements. 1. Establish a mechanism for strategic cooperation between the two parties, which deals with strategic planning and evaluation. Direct diplomatic work. 3. Encouraging the work of Sudanese and American private sector institutions and research centers to present solution ideas and innovations. 4. Organizing a periodic conference for dialogue and common knowledge and understanding. 5. Establishing a joint investment portfolio to support mutual trade and investment in industry, transfer American industrial capabilities to Sudan. 6. Establishment of joint agricultural and industrial investment areas. 8. The Sudanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry in the United States of America and Sudan for the precise tasks. 9. Establishing professional marketing agencies and information centers, as well as exchange centers to bring expertise and knowledge to markets and finance projects. 10. The medical cities. 11. Establishment of universities, centers and institutions of technical and vocational education. 12. The establishment of an American Archaeological Research Center in Sudan. And thank you.